Liverpool have had a perfect start to the new season, winning their first 5 games in the Premier League, and now with Arsenal 5 points behind, Chelsea 7 and Manchester City 8. On today's episode of the podcast, Toby and I are going to be trying to answer the question, which of the chasing pack can close the gap? And we should start off by briefly talking about Liverpool, because despite the fact that they've had this perfect start, there has been a narrative going around that they haven't necessarily been playing at their best. And is that a narrative that you subscribe to, Toby? And what have you made of Liverpool's performances in the opening 5 games of the season?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, 5 wins from 5, sitting top of the table. And as we're going to discuss, some of those challenges not really pushing them yet. It feels like that Liverpool should have no complaints at all. And I think they have been playing very well at moments in games at least, and it feels like when they are playing at their best, they look like the best side in the league. There are just moments in games where it feels like that intensity is dropping, and it's allowing other teams in moments in games to really get back at them. And I think maybe that's where that potential vulnerability is with Liverpool, which again links to probably the main narrative is that Liverpool are relying on so many late winners, and it feels like almost every game they've had so far this season they have had that, and ultimately it's kind of a double-edged sword where they are playing so well, so they are in the opportunity to get those late winners, but they are becoming, because of those moments, maybe where they aren't playing as well as they should be.
Yeah, I agree on that. I think it would be so much easier for them if they just scored one more goal in each of the games. And I think even the Everton one on the weekend where they were holding on to their lead, even that didn't feel great watching it from a fan's perspective. But what I would say to that is, in all the games so far this season, Alisson Becker has only had 4 shots to save. I mean, he's conceded 5 goals, and the other shots on target he's had to save 4 of them. I don't think that teams, while they are putting Liverpool under pressure in terms of getting the ball out the pitch, keeping hold of possession, I'm not sure they're necessarily creating too many clear-cut chances and leading to Alisson Becker making lots of saves. But I will say, in Liverpool's defence as well, I think they've got a lot of new players that they still need to gel into that side. I think there are tactical tweaks taking place at this Liverpool side, which I think are still too early to really talk about in depth, but one we're going to be keeping an eye on as the season progresses. And I also think the fact that you've got all the new partnerships, you've got to try and figure out how they're going to play. And I think a lot of players coming from different leagues as well, the intensity of the Premier League. I think there are so many different factors. And I think you are right in saying the most important thing is that Liverpool have won all the games. And I don't think Arne Slot and his men are going to be worried in any other way apart from just getting the points on the board, because everyone else is going to be chasing after them. And they need to make sure that when Liverpool do drop points, because they absolutely will, they're not going to win every single game this season, that they are there close behind them to capitalise and put some pressure on them, because like you said, last season, that wasn't necessarily the case. So let's then start off with Manchester City, who on the weekend had a 1-1 draw away against Arsenal, and they're 8 points behind Liverpool at the moment. It's not necessarily been the Manchester City we know. They tend to start slowly in season where they have gone to do well. But is that something that maybe they can afford to do this season? What are your thoughts generally on Manchester City?
Yeah, it feels like after this weekend, I don't really know where to start with Manchester City, because this was maybe the least Manchester City performance we've ever seen. Lowest ever possession for Pep in the Premier League, only 33%. And Manchester City sat back. They defended deep. They didn't even really look to counter past the first sort of 20, 30 minutes, taking out attacking players at the hour mark, not even going to the corner sometimes by the end. They didn't even want to risk getting the ball that high. It was really, really different and a complete change from Pep Guardiola. And I think probably a change that maybe not this extreme in terms of parking the bus, but I think one that we have discussed, and I'm sure a lot of people have discussed, is that those frailties of Manchester City earlier this season and last season was their defence. Them being caught out by transitions. When they had control of that ball, they still looked really vulnerable out wide in transitions. And this feels like an attempt to correct that from Pep. Maybe in this game it was an overcorrection, the fact that they didn't get that win, and that maybe with a little bit more attack and a little bit more bravery, they probably could have nicked another goal on the transition. But yeah, this is a really strange game to look at because yeah, I think earlier in the season the problems were their defense, whereas now in this game maybe it feels more that it was their attack. So yeah, a couple things to look at with City really.
Yeah, it almost felt like with the Arsenal Man City games, because it has always been Arteta trying to adapt to Pep, it kind of almost felt the other way around in this one, which is weird to say. And
Yeah.
I think part of it was mainly due to the fact that obviously they played the Champions League game in midweek on the Thursday night and then had to play Arsenal on the Sunday, which Guardiola himself did mention in this post-match interview. But to counteract Guardiola, I think what I would say to that is he started the same starting 11 in the last three games. So maybe he could have rotated his squad a little bit more than he did. But then also, I think maybe it was the game plan from the off to not press so intensely on Arsenal because you saw what happened against Brighton and Hove Albion when they won 2-1 and they were carved open time and time again in that second half by Brighton. And Arsenal have, no disrespect to Brighton, much better players in those attacking positions and in transition now, especially with Gyökeres and Madueke. So you did think to yourself that Arsenal could really hurt Man City if they were to come out on the front foot and were to press aggressively. So I think that first half, I think actually Guardiola got the better of Arteta because he did something that he didn't expect Arteta. But in that second half, when he made those changes, when he went after them, I think Guardiola only saw one option, and that was to defend. Because I think that if City had opened up, then I think they would have been exploited, and Arsenal would have scored that equaliser, which in my opinion was coming, but it would have scored it much, much earlier. Are you happy that, from a neutral perspective, that Guardiola is changing? Do you think this is a permanent change, or do you think this is just a short-term solution to an issue that they've been having for just under a year now, really?
Yeah, I don't think this is going to be a permanent change. I think it is game specific, I would probably say. I think Pep wasn't particularly worried about Arsenal creating much centrally, which is where if you're parking the bus, you can just allow Arsenal, especially, to sort of be passing around that block without any real sort of penetration, which there was for the majority of that game. I think in other games, Pep is not going to relinquish the control that much. But I do think it was a good change and a change that worked. And maybe in other games it won't be as extreme as we saw in this Arsenal game. But I think there will be minor tweaks to have a little bit more cover in that defence, which we have seen has been a big struggle of Manchester City. So yeah, I definitely don't think this is going to be a big change where we're going to see Manchester City sitting much deeper, because I think that's really going to restrict their attacking outputs, especially against teams who are going to be trying to sit against them, and you're just going to have a strange stalemate at that point. But yeah, I think maybe this is a sign that Pep is at least adapting things and will take some things from this game going forward. Like I think playing Kushnov and O'Reilly were really sensible picks in this game. I think they were both fantastic defensively, and I think maybe having less sort of emphasis on those fullbacks either bombing forward or inverting and just having them as defenders at times is something that I think has been needed for Manchester City, and I think in this game was a perfect example of that, because for me they were probably Manchester City's two best players.
Yeah, they had a really good game. I was really impressed by Nico O'Reilly, especially because you forget, especially with Man City youngsters, because they come through the system and the youth academy, they play a certain way, and then when they come into the side, they hit the ground running, and then you forget actually that, I don't think he's even made 30 Premier League appearances so far at such a young age. I mean, he only made his debut last season. So the fact that he came in, and I think he did quite well against Donny Madueke. I think Madueke, with his dynamism and unpredictability, to predict if he's going to left or right, to stop him and to keep him a lot quieter than he has seemed in other games, I think was a real positive. And I think that Kusanov, he's one where he seems very strong and really wants to get close to someone and tackle them. But I think if he just calms down a little bit as well, then I think if he shows a bit more composure, he could be an outstanding right back or centre back, which is where I see him long term. And that's considering the fact that both of them are still really young as well. I wanted to ask you about Bernardo Silva and Phil Foden, because we saw in the Manchester derby that Phil Foden was in the middle and Bernardo Silva was out on the right. And this one, it seems like they're playing the other way around. Bernardo Silva was in the middle and Phil Foden was out on the right. Do you see it more of a Pep adapting to the opposition that he's coming up against, or do you see that they have two different skill sets that can be utilised in two different ways? Do you think it was more about Arsenal, or do you think it was more about Man City, why he decided to change those two?
Yeah, I imagine it in this game it would have been to face Arsenal. I think Foden obviously has a bit more of the legs than Bernardo Silva, to put it bluntly. And I think having Foden out wide in this game was one to support Kushnov probably more defensively, while still allowing Foden to get up and down when needed as well, quickly in transition. Whereas I think when you had Bernardo Silva playing centrally, when Manchester City did get that ball and get out, realistically, Bernardo Silva is going to be having that ball very deep in the Manchester City half, and having somebody who is possibly one of the best ball retainers in the world, having that, being able to keep the ball against the Arsenal press, get it out quickly to somebody like Foden or Reinders or Doku to then transition, I think made sense in this game. Going forward, I think it's pretty interchangeable between the two, really. I think it's probably more likely we'll see Foden centrally. And I think there's a really good opportunity to them to form a really nice partnership in terms of Reinders, Foden, sort of behind Haaland, and having players more like Doku or Cherki when he's back from injury, or Savinho as those sort of true wingers. I definitely think there'll be more of a shift to have Foden centrally. But yeah, in this game, I think it was probably based on Arsenal, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment as well. I did want to mention, though, that right-hand side for Manchester City, because, like we talked about, Kusnov I thought was great defensively, and Foden did a great job of tracking Calafiori. I do worry about it going forward, Man City's right-hand side. I do think I saw a graphic that showed the amount of attempts that Man City had from the left, the middle, and the right. And from that right-hand side, they had no attempts, and they had an XG of 0 from chances created from that right-hand side. So really, it was basically all Haaland down the middle or Doku on the left-hand side. Doku, I thought, was phenomenal again. I think something's happening with him this season. I think he's maybe taking his game to another level. But that right-hand side, ever since Mahrez, it hasn't quite felt right, I think it's fair to say. I mean, maybe in the future against a lesser opposition, I'd maybe like to see Oscar Bob there, or maybe Savinho play. But can understand with some of the injury issues at the moment with no Marmoush and with Haaland having to come off, that maybe Pep wants to keep a little bit in reserve. But I don't know if you've noticed as well, but I'm a little bit worried about Man City's right-hand side and how they build a play on that right-hand side, because you don't really have anyone set on the right wing. You don't really have anyone set in right central midfield, and you don't have anyone set at right back. It almost feels like that entire right-hand side is an area of concern in terms of consistently playing and getting quality players in those positions to link up play with each other. I think against most teams they'll be fine. But against the top opposition, I don't know who they pick, and I don't know if ever they're going to... I think it's just going to be a left-sided skew is what I'm trying to say, and I don't think that right-hand side is going to contribute much.
No, yeah, it's definitely something I've noticed, and it's something that I think Arsenal, just to touch on them as well, have the opposite problem of. They have a real right-sided dominance through Saka and Timber and Odegaard when he's fit, and it feels the same, like you said, with Manchester City, but maybe on that left-hand side when you've got somebody as electric and somebody who demands that ball as much as Doku. And also Reinders, I think, being one of the key players for Manchester City at the moment, does sort of more drift into that left half space. And even playing Foden centrally, if you're playing him as sort of the right-sided central midfielder, he just wants to be in those really, really central areas, and maybe can leave whoever is playing on that right a little bit isolated. And again, with Pep's system, with fullbacks more likely inverting, it can leave a winger out there really, really isolated, which is where I think somebody like Savinho would thrive, and I think should get a little bit more game time than he does. Maybe not so in this Arsenal game, given the way that Manchester City set up. But I think in a game where Manchester City have real control of the ball, somebody who can take on a defender one-on-one in those wide areas is what Manchester City need, not just on that left side with Doku, but give somebody the sort of responsibility to do that on the right-hand side, because somebody like Bernardo Silva or Foden are not sort of pure wingers, pure dribblers who are going to do that. They are just going to try and distribute that ball centrally or pushing it back out to that left-hand side.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And I suppose the last thing to talk about City is them in general in terms of the Premier League, because obviously, like I said, they're 8 points behind Liverpool at the time of recording. They can go and do amazing things against Napoli in the Champions League. They can go and beat Man United 3-0 very convincingly in the derby. But then they also go and lose to Brighton 2-1, Spurs 2-0 as well. Can they catch Liverpool? And if so, what do they need to maybe change to make sure that they keep winning between now and when Liverpool do eventually drop points?
Yeah, I think there are still some really good performances from Manchester City this season. Like you said, against Napoli, it was a complete domination. Yes, against 10 men, but they got the job done. I think they played well. Against Manchester United, they played well. It feels like there now needs to be a bit of a middle ground, maybe between this Arsenal performance and what we saw against Brighton and Tottenham. Against Brighton and Tottenham, City still attacked really well, controlled the ball really well, just struggled against those transitions defensively. Whereas I think in this game, they sort of relinquished control a bit. So I think Pep is going to find that balance. And I think if they can, like you said, that's the thing with Manchester City. We can talk all day about how they're playing at the moment. Once they get into gear in that second half of the season, they can win 15, 16 games almost in a row in that sort of end period after Christmas. And if they're 7, 8 points behind, then it's still possible for them to do it. Will they do it? Oh, I don't know. It's this Manchester City side of last season and this season. Maybe there isn't that fear anymore, and maybe that's a big thing as well that they'll have coming up against a few teams this season. That without that, teams will maybe be a little bit more adventurous against them as well. So it might be tougher for them. How do you see it? Do you think Manchester City are going to be title challengers?
I think it's too early to say that they won't be there or thereabouts. I mean, I'm looking at the players that have out injured at the moment. You got Aït-Nouri, Kovacic, Cherki, and Marmoush. And apparently after the game, Pep Guardiola even mentioned that Haaland requested to be taken off because he felt something as well. He might be out for the League Cup game in midweek. I'm 95% certain he's going to start at the weekend. But the thing is, I do think that with Haaland scoring 6 goals so far already, and the fact that that's his slowest start to a Premier League season so far, that is absolutely crazy from 5 games, 6 goals. I do think that, I said it before, I think in our predictions video, that there may be a small over-reliance on Erling Haaland to get all the goals. I think Doku, who, like I said, I praised, and I think something's happening with him this season. He does need to contribute more goals and assists. Foden needs to do the same. Savini needs to do the same. Hopefully you can get Marmoush fit and on the pitch, and therefore he can help contribute and take some of the pressure off him. But like you said, it doesn't feel quite all dominant, all conquering. And I don't look at that squad the same way I do with Liverpool or like our next team, Arsenal. So I think to say they will be there or thereabouts, but I'm not sure. And most importantly, like you said, they can go on that run in the second half of the season, but they need to make sure they're within enough points to make sure that that run, if it were to happen, would be enough to catch up Liverpool. Let's move on then to Arsenal, who are only 5 points behind Liverpool. The games that they did drop points was Man City in the weekend when they drew, and of course Liverpool when they lost away at Anfield. What have you made them so far this season? Obviously had a lot of new signings, had a lot of injuries as well, which has really allowed the new signings to settle into their first team squad quite nicely, actually, I think. What have you made of them so far, and do you like what you're seeing, or is there some areas of concern for you?
Yeah, I think generally Arsenal have looked good again this season. I think defensively somehow potentially even better than last season. I think in this Manchester City game against Bilbao, against Liverpool, I think the defence was fantastic. Looks really strong. I mean, players like Mosquera coming in and Calafiori sort of stepping into that first 11 now. I think they've performed really, really well, and absolutely no issues at the back. It's where I think you start to go more into the midfield and the forward line, and maybe things aren't that different to last season in terms of chance creation. Really does feel like it's Arsenal's biggest problem at the moment. Generally in the season, it hasn't been too much of an issue, and I think we've been clinical enough and we have created just enough. But I think it's shown in the Liverpool game and now in this Manchester City game that, yes, we can control the game, we can control the ball, but we're still really struggling with those final passes, with that speed of attack, and I think with that intensity that maybe it felt like having players like Eze and Odegaard and Saka all fit and playing and clicking, and it was going to be an easy solution just having these amazing players firing. But it maybe still feels like it's a tactical and a systematic issue at Arsenal that just don't really create a lot of chances when we need to. And it felt like, especially in this game, the game was there to be won, and it just faltered maybe because of that.
Yeah, I did think to myself while watching the game on the weekend that Arsenal are doing so well getting the ball up the pitch and causing Man City problems. But the most important thing is they're not making the goalkeeper do anything in the goal. I mean, Donnarumma, while coming into the league, while looking fantastic so far, only had 3 shots on target to face, and one of them was the goal. So before that goal that went in at the time of the second half, really, what else did Donnarumma have to do in that game prior? You had the Noni Madueke shot, which was good, and then there was another one as well. But I did think to myself that maybe the team selection in that first half was a little bit of a mistake. Was it perhaps a little bit too passive? And was it Mikel Arteta thinking Pep Guardiola's side were going to do one thing, they ended up doing something else? But what I will give him credit for is the fact that he changed it quickly in the second half. He changed it immediately at half time. So I want to pose the question to you. Do you think Arsenal were too passive in their team selection and too passive in their play in that first half?
100%. Yeah, I think it's a lot of it is down to the team selection in terms of having Marino over Eze, not having a true creative midfielder in there, whether giving that to, like I said, Eze or Nwaneri, and going with 3 midfielders who are not generally the most attacking, and they are more sort of possession-based players, defensive players in that midfield 3 of Marino, Rice and Zubimendi. And I also think in terms of the way that those players were playing, I think Marino and Rice are 2 players who can sit at the edge of the box and be really good creators and really link up the play. But it didn't feel like whether they were instructed not to commit too much in that first half. And I think even after the half-hour mark, it was still, they looked quite conservative, and you didn't really have Marino or Rice picking up the ball and driving forward and supporting maybe Gyökeres in those half spaces between the striker and the winger, which I think was there for them to do, but I just think they weren't instructed to do so in that first half, and I think it was a combination of both of those that just Arsenal were so flat in that first half and didn't make anything. But to give Arteta credit, and something that I think he probably hasn't done in the past and has been criticised for, is not changing things soon enough, and the changes of Saka and Eze did make a massive difference going into that second half, didn't they?
Yeah, Arsenal are so good at attacking from the wide areas, and now you've got options as well. So whether it's Madueke or Saka on the right, or even Ethan Nwaneri who can play there as well, or if it's Trossard, Martinelli, Eze on the left, Arsenal have a plethora of wide options. But then they've also got the fullbacks bombarding forward as well. I thought Calafiori, like hugging the touchline, providing a lot of width, was great in this game from in possession point of view. I think Timber is one of the best right backs defensively in the league and in the world, but then going forward he's starting to show a little bit more as well, helping Madueke. But I think Madueke maybe needs a fullback to support rather than overlap, because I think he wants that space to be able to run into himself. I think Arsenal have so many amazing wide options, but it, like you said, it's that midfield, like that zone 14 just outside the penalty area, where they could have maybe penetrated it more than they did, but they didn't even try to penetrate through the middle, and that's what I think was disappointing, because there's one thing trying something and it not working, but without even trying, you don't know if it was there to be exploited. And considering the fact that by the time it got late into the second half, when Arsenal were piling on the pressure, Man City were getting tired, they're playing with a 4 midfield who, that's not a formation that they regularly play. See if they can get into the midfield, see if you can play around them, but they didn't quite have the bravery to do it, and, maybe without Martin Odegaard, for the fact that sometimes we criticize him for not necessarily providing the attacking returns and getting into playing in those number 10 positions and dropping deep, he's maybe someone who could have done it. But without him, you really would have liked to see Eze in that role. But actually in this game, I would have liked to see Eze in the 10 and out on the left, because while I think Kusanov had a good first half, I think it was made easy by the fact that Trossard was playing and not Eze, because like we talked about with Man City, they don't necessarily have an out and out first choice right back. So I would have liked to see Eze, who, yes, he didn't have the best game in midweek against Bilbao, but I still think he's arguably your best left winger, and therefore I would have liked to see him out there. And if Arteta knew how Guardiola was going to set up, would his lineup be different? And I think honestly the answer is yes to that.
Yeah, and it was weird when SA came on because I think he had some good moments, but a lot of the time he was almost playing too centrally, and I think it meant that he didn't really actually get much of the ball and much of the ball in a position where he could really do something. I think with the change of Eze coming on, we should have really seen maybe Eze in one of the half spaces, and more likely it sort of drifted into being the Martin Odegaard role in the right half space. But it's still, with Eze being so central, it felt like we had a front three and then Eze and then two midfielders, where we should have really had Eze pushed up into one of the half spaces. Declan Rice potentially in that left half space should have pushed up and been a little bit more attacking, and just you can leave Zubimendi on his own deep because he is really, really good and he has played fantastically this season. He can just do that and sit there, or if not, have one of the fullbacks invert in and support him if needed, which I don't think we really saw this game at all. And personally, maybe something that I think was missed was Miles Lewis-Skelly towards the last sort of half an hour of this game, somebody who can pick up that ball, run in and support the midfield when it's needed, as opposed to Calafiori, who, like you said, I think it works well when he does hug the touchline and Trossard sort of drifting inside. But by sort of the 55th, 60th minute, the Manchester City was so deep that Calafiori wasn't really doing anything down in that position, and I think we needed a little bit more support centrally there. So yeah, fair play to Arteta for making some early changes and trying to adapt to the game. I just think there was still maybe opportunity for him to do even more, especially when it got to like 65, 70 minutes. Manchester City's attackers were coming off for defenders. It should have been, right, bang, this has got to go, just throw everything at it. We did get the goal from Martinelli, who was one of the subs, but I don't know. Maybe we could have got a little bit more out of that game. Maybe I'm being greedy. It was against Manchester City.
No, I don't think you are necessarily being greedy. I can completely see it. And I wonder if it wasn't Manchester City, if it was another team in the league, would that be the same starting 11 that Arteta would have put out? I don't think so. And that's easy to say in hindsight because we know how the game panned out. However, I think it's difficult because it is Man City and you do want to counteract what they're doing as well, because if you don't and they're on form on the day, then they can really hurt you. But if Arteta just played his best 11 that was fit, would Eze be starting? Would maybe Waneri be starting in the midfield? Maybe. These are all just hypotheticals. And I suppose the question is, especially from the mainstream media, and it's a narrative that's been going on a while, and I just want to get your thoughts on it. Does Arteta need to take the handbrake off Arsenal if they are to win more big games, because they have already won a lot of big games, and then which could perhaps change the mentality of Arsenal to help them get over the line and win the league?
Yeah, and I think it's about trusting some of those second choice players, I think, a lot as well. Because I think when we play with a clear attacking midfielder in the three and you have Rice with it, like you said, a little bit of that handbrake off. And I think Rice this season, as he was sort of at times last season, being a lot more attacking, can do so much damage for us. Whereas I think when, like against Manchester City, we had Martin Odegaard injured, Arteta's not thinking, okay, let's have the same system that's worked really well and we know can work, and having Eze or Nwaneri in that position completely change the midfield and sort of change how Arsenal are going to play. And I don't think we need to do that, because the defenders that we have are some of the best in the world. We have a fantastic goalkeeper. It's a really good defensive setup already, that I think changing it, the midfield and the attack to be a little bit more conservative, isn't really helping out the defence that much. It is just ultimately hindering the attack.
And as the saying often goes, the best form of defence is attack. So could Arteta be, stifling his own side? And while you were talking there, it's actually quite interesting, because you were talking about he needs to trust the squad more to then, give him a bit more rest and allow and maybe freshen things up. And it's weird because 15 minutes earlier, I was talking about the same thing with Pep Guardiola, in terms of he's played the same starting 11 in the last 3 games. Maybe that's kind of where he's got it from. And, maybe they both need to rotate and trust the squads a bit more, because let's say, for argument's sake, that without the injuries, would Madueke have got this much of a run out? Probably not with Saka. Would Eze have been the same? Would Mascara, Who knows? It's difficult because Arsenal have a fantastic starting 11 and they have a fantastic second 11 now as well. That you can't necessarily be playing all these players all the time, but maybe he does need to rotate a little bit more often. And the final point I just want to ask you about Arsenal is the injuries, because I can't believe I saw this. At least one Arsenal player has got injured in every Premier League game so far this season. So I think you've had Havertz out injured, you've had Saka injured, Odegaard injured, Saliba injured, Jesus was already injured, Madueke got injured in the Man City game. Is there some sort of underlying stats or some opinions that you've heard floating around Twitter that you maybe think to yourself, this might be why it's happening? Because it seems to be a recurring theme that Arsenal continuously get injuries to some of their most important players. Is there anything that you've seen or have read that links to any injury patterns in particular under Arteta?
I think besides potentially, like you said, overplaying in the last few seasons, I think has been a big issue for players like Saka and Odegaard. Besides that, I don't really think there is. A lot of them haven't been major injuries. I mean, we've already seen Saka come back, which is great news. Hopefully that doesn't mean that Madueke's sort of completely pushed out the squad, though. I would like to see him maybe feature on the left at times and come on in games when needed. Saliba is already back now. He was only a few games out. Odegaard, I don't think, is far away from coming back. So I don't think it's anything potentially major or behind the scenes, fingers crossed, and that it is just a few sort of like knocks and things. And I think maybe that's just part of the way that Arsenal play. I mean, we see, I think, a lot of the top sides. That's why they have such good squads. They're on the ball so much, and they have, especially the wingers, the way that they play, I think they just get fouled a lot. I know that's the case in Saka. He just gets absolutely battered in games a lot of the time. So I think the amount of games that Saka has played, given probably the fouls and the amount of ball that he has, is probably not too bad overall. So
fair enough. We'll move on then to our third team, who are Chelsea. And they're 7 points currently behind Liverpool. And at the start of the season, a lot of people were talking about them potentially being dark horses for the Premier League title, not necessarily winning it, but just being in and around the conversation, us included in that fact as well. But they have slightly disappointed so far this season. Is that fair to say? Because they've got 2 wins in the league, 2 draws, and 1 loss. It's not really the kind of form you'd expect for a side to be in the Champions League and potentially being outside shouts for the title. However, they are only 2 points behind Chelsea, Spurs and Crystal Palace, who are in the Champions League places at the moment. What have you made of Chelsea so far from the first 5 games?
Yeah, they have some really good moments. They have some very exciting young players. It just doesn't feel like it's there quite yet. I think defensively there's still some big issues. I think their squad is still very, very young. I'm not sure if they have a really set system just yet. Some really good positives though as well. I still think Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez are playing really, really well. I think in terms of the way that their fullbacks play is great. I mean, you've got João Pedro and Cole Palmer. When they're playing and playing well, they're fantastic. It just feels like they're still sort of building to something, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. And I think maybe they're finding out which players really fit their system, how exactly they want to play. I think is still some few question marks over that. But yeah, it's definitely still building, and I think they're still improving gradually. It's just, again, I think maybe a little bit early for them to sort of start the season as dark horses for the title, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I think going forward, they've been great, really. 10 goals in the first 5 games. I think they've got really good looking forward. I do think, yeah, like you said, though, for me, it's defensively. They've conceded 5 goals, which, 1 goal a game. Liverpool have conceded the same amount, so it's not the end of the world. I think for me, it's the fact that it's how they're conceding those goals. I think the defending at time has not been great, especially that initial press from the front line, because you often see the forward players, especially the wide ones, try and press inside to the centre backs, which leaves the full backs with a lot of work to do. So sometimes they have to mark the wingers, sometimes have to push forward with the rest of the team and mark the full backs, especially against Brentford and Man United, where the full backs were being tasked with marking the number 10s, but then also the wing backs, depending on how the front line pressed. And then that back line with the centre backs of whoever's playing, do they drop, do they stay up? And then they don't necessarily, I don't think, in my opinion anyway, trust Robert Sanchez to be a great sweeper keeper, which we saw as an example of that against Manchester United. So I think they are improving as a team in terms of their performances and how they play. I do just think, like you said, they are a very young side. They're still developing the way they're going to be playing, and they're going to make mistakes along the way. And so far, I think we've seen that. I mean, it's not been a great week for Chelsea as a whole. 1 point in 3 games. I mean, drawing against Brentford, losing to Bayern Munich, and then losing to Manchester United. Has this week, which has been bad in particular, changed anything from the positivity that maybe you saw when they were unbeaten in the first 4 games in the Premier League so far?
Yeah, I think the big thing is Cole Palmer, really, and I think it was quite clear in this Man United game. I think it's only fair for Chelsea to look at the second half of them going forward when it was 10v10. 72% possession, but only 3 shots, and I think a lot of that was down to, yes, Esteval and Neto, I think, are really good creators and players who were also taken off in this game and were missing. But the main one is Cole Palmer. He just makes absolutely everything tick for Chelsea. And when he's not there, it's so obvious. Not even just in terms of him creating real chances or scoring goals, the way that he creates space for others, the way that he brings the wingers into the game when he's playing centrally for them to be able to create chances. I think it's just absolutely massive for Chelsea, and was really, really missed in that second half. And I think especially as well with the injuries that they have, in terms of like to Liam Delap and João Pedro having to be their striker, they don't really have a pure creator centrally without Cole Palmer, because João Pedro can't drop in and play that 10, because then who's going to play up front? And I think at the moment it's only short term, with Cole Palmer's sort of injury and other injuries they have. But I think they need a bit of a quick fix, maybe, to have somebody like Cole Palmer playing in there.
Maybe it was a mistake to let Nicholas Jackson go out on loan to Bayern Munich. The truth of that, I guess we'll never really know, because it looked like he was going, then Delap got injured and maybe he wasn't, and then it was happening again, so maybe there's something going on. But I wanted to ask you actually about in terms of the Cole Palmer injury, but also about Enzo Maresca in general, because in this week, against Brentford, he made 3 changes at half-time. He brought on George, James and Cucurella and took off Buonanotte, Fofana and Hato. And then in midweek against Bayern Munich, you could see on the TV, he sent out the subs to warm up, but then he delayed bringing them on until Bayern Munich made it 3-1, and then he brought them on 5 minutes later after that, so perhaps a little bit too late. And then again against Man United, like we hinted, the changes he made, taking off the attackers, and then when Man United did eventually go 10 men down as well, then he didn't have much to bring on the bench. But then also the fact that he hasn't used Mark Gui, who was loaned out to Sunderland, Jackson got injured, brought him back. Buonanotte, who's been brought in to add depth to the fact that when Cole Palmer is out, he can provide a bit of creativity. Well, he started against Brentford, and then he wasn't even on the bench against Manchester United. And then against Man United as well, the players that he didn't bring on, Gittins and also Garnacho. There seems to be a lot going on with that Chelsea squad in general. But what do you make of Enzo Maresca and the starting 11s he's put out, the changes he's made, the changes he's not made, and what do you think his opinion of the Chelsea squad is at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing with the Chelsea squad. It's so big and there's so many players that Maresca's, I think, mind can very easily be changed week to week, as we're seeing with the starting lineup, and it's very difficult, I think, to not only predict what lineup Maresca's going to have, but to also say your opinion on what you think the best Chelsea 11 actually is. I'm sure everybody has a different 11 they think Chelsea should play. I just think there's not really a clear starter in every position for Chelsea, maybe in around half the positions on their pitch. I think the centre-backs and the goalie is still an issue, and I think you're looking at the wingers as well. Can seem to change every week, and they are probably the positions for Chelsea where they are performing the least at the moment, whether that's the players not playing as well as they should be, or players potentially not getting runs of games as you would expect to have.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I don't think Maresca is necessarily like the finished article in terms of a manager. I think he's still learning. But I wouldn't be surprised, if he's sending a message. And this isn't based on anything. This is just based on the actions he's doing in terms of substitutions and his starting 11. But I wonder if he's not entirely happy with the Chelsea squad. I think the fact that he keeps bringing on George, who's a very talented player, but he was seemingly out the door going to Fulham on deadline day. That didn't happen, and now he's coming on instead of Gui. He's not even in the Manchester squad at times, and coming on ahead of Garnacho and Gittins, who they spent around 80 to 90 million pounds on. I'm not sure Maresca's entirely happy with the squad, but that is just purely conjecture. We'll have to see. Maybe it's just a case of they're getting used to what he demands from these players, and they're going to take time to get used to it. But in terms of can they catch Liverpool? I mean, like I said, Liverpool aren't going to be winning every single game of the season. Do you think they can?
I would say that I think Arsenal have more of a chance. I would say that Manchester City probably still have more of a chance. I would say that Chelsea maybe have the talent to do so, but I still think it's just a little bit early for the squad and for the system that they play. I can't see them unless they have a consistent starting 11 and they have consistent performers really getting a good run of games that I think a title challenge needs. I just can't see that happening this season. I think they're certainly able to get top 4/5 and get Champions League. I think that will be a really good aim for a squad that's so young and is still building and developing and developing week on week, really. I just don't think they are quite at that level yet. But who knows? I mean, like I said with Cole Palmer, when you've got him firing, maybe he can carry them there as well and give them that extra boost, but I'm not too sure. What do you reckon?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think I have to agree with you. For me, it was the first game of the season against Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace, who are on fire at the moment, unbeaten in the league, and also in the Champions League places. I mean, at some point on this podcast, we're going to have to talk about them. But when Chelsea drew 0-0 with them at home, and there wasn't a massive fuss, there wasn't a massive outcry, at that game, I thought to myself, surely there should be. I mean, we're all talking about them as potentially being dark horses for the title. They've got talent. They've got some seriously talented players in the squad. Maybe it is a few years too early, but when I didn't see too much of an outcry after that game, I thought to myself, if they don't win games, it's not the end of the world. We don't latch on them too much. I think the Man United one was maybe an exception because obviously Robert Sanchez cost the team, and then who can predict that Cole Palmer is going to get injured? Well, maybe Maresca, who knows? But yeah, I don't see them challenging for the league. I think it's one where Man City and Arsenal, mainly Arsenal, maybe City, not quite sure about Chelsea, but I think Chelsea are the furthest of the three teams of catching Liverpool if they were to do so. But I also wouldn't be surprised if they went on a 5 to 10 stretch of winning games consistently, because that wouldn't surprise me either too much. And a bonus team, which we've got for you all. I wonder if the viewers at home can guess. We've got a bonus team who we think could potentially challenge, but we're not quite sure if they will actually end up winning the Premier League. Toby, do you want to reveal who our final team is?
Yeah, I mean, and I think like we said before we started filming, it feels like maybe we actually just should include them because they're on the same amount of points as Arsenal at the moment, and it's their North London rival Spurs, who look like a very different side in a lot of positive ways, maybe a few tiny negatives and maybe a few little things that were highlighted in the game against Brighton on the weekend. But yeah, Spurs side who are up there at the moment. So yeah, let's talk about them.
Yeah, like I said, third place in the table at the moment, behind Arsenal on goal difference and just ahead of Crystal Palace. I would just come out and say just right off the back, I don't think they're in the title race. I don't think they're going to win the league, right? So take everything we're about to say with a pinch of salt. But I do think it is justifiable to talk about Spurs because, like we said, they have got there so far. And I think they have a really good and talented squad. I'm worried about the star quality in that starting 11. And maybe this is a little bit because of the fact that they were so bad under Ange Postecoglou in the league last year. To see them do so much better is refreshing and it's new and it's exciting. But I do think there is a lot to like about this Thomas Frank Spurs side. They're much better at set pieces, and that was a massive bane of Spurs last season, one which Postecoglou refused to address and even came out in interviews and said, we've got bigger problems than that. Well, Just start with the small problems, and the bigger problems might not seem as bad anymore. And the fact that they look a lot better in open play as well. They've got some really talented, exciting players. Unfortunate that they drew on the weekend against Brighton. I think Brighton were the much better side, and obviously Vicario made an error with that second goal, in my opinion. But when Xavi Simons came on the pitch, he seemed to be like one of the most exciting players on the pitch and really made a difference. So I think they do have a lot to really, really like Spurs. But my only question is, I don't think they're in a title race. It is about the Champions League in terms of the league form for me. But my question is, can this form be sustained over the course of the entire season and with Champions League football in the mix as well? That's where I think they could potentially fall down. But what do you think, Toby, are the strengths and weaknesses of the Spurs side?
Yeah, I think Spurs are certainly trying to find more of a balance that they really lacked last year. I think they're still working on that. I think the last few games they have played quite a defensive midfield, and we have seen players sort of like Xavi Simons who needs to become the star of that Spurs team because his talent is absolutely exceptional. I would really like to see him play a little bit more centrally as opposed to out as a pure left winger that it seems the wingers are in this Spurs system at the moment. And I think it'd be nice to see if they can find a way to have maybe sort of two players behind or one player as a six as opposed to sort of playing Bentancur and Paulinho and Sarr. But I think it's certainly a step in the right direction for Spurs in their defence has been vastly improved compared to last year. But again, I think like we were saying with Manchester City in that Arsenal game, that maybe it comes with a little bit of a detriment to their attack. And I think when Spurs this season, it doesn't feel like they have as much firepower going forward. I think with Kulusevski and Maddison injured at the moment and it's sort of being Odegaard or Tell playing as a left winger, they could do with a few of those players back, and I think once they are back, they could look really, really strong, especially under Frank, who as a few episodes ago I said I think he's one of the best managers in the league for me.
Yeah, I do agree on that forward line though. But just to mention though that they're doing so well so far. But they've got the players that got out injured: Kolomuani, Solanke, Kulusevski, Maddison, Dragusin, Takai, and Ben Davies. But I do agree that forward line. I mean, the front three that started on the weekend of Richarlison, Kudus, and Odegaard. I mean, they're good. They are good Premier League players, but when you think about the forward line, the Liverpool or Arsenal or maybe not even Man City nowadays, still, I'd be more excited with Man City's forward line. Compare that with Spurs, they are a level below, I think. And, well, I don't think necessarily Son Heung-min was the answer. He was someone who, for years on the left-hand side, was a lockdown. Him and Kane were arguably world-class and the best in the league in their positions. And so, moving on from that, I don't think they have that star quality. Can they create that star player? I think, like I said, I think that's why it's so important that Xavi Simons plays regularly, because he has that star quality to be one of the best players in the league and one of the best players in Europe. So he needs to start regularly. Like you said, I think like a lot of players who have come over from the Bundesliga this season, I think he might take a little bit of time to adapt to the physicality and the intensity of the Premier League and then go into midweek games as well. I think it might take a lot of toll on his legs. And I also think that they've got some really good, exciting young players, but Bergvald's taking another step. Archie Gray's still there. Pape Matar still doing really well. But again, they're still quite young players, and I don't think their experienced players are necessarily the best in the league in any of their positions. So they are going to be good. They're going to be very exciting to watch, and I think they're going to have some fantastic results this season. I mean, they were 15 minutes away from winning the Super Cup against PSG, who have just dominated all the awards at the Ballon d'Or. So yes, they're definitely going to be there and thereabouts. But is it fair to say that it's probably just top four and an honourable mention for this video, I think?
Yeah, I think they are probably in their sort of development and mini rebuild following Ange, just behind Chelsea, but I think honestly they could be on a pretty similar level. I think if both squads were fully fit and playing at their best, I think they're pretty evenly matched, and maybe that tier below sort of the top three, top two that we were discussing earlier, but certainly teams that should be pushing to get Champions League football again next year.